Okay, the roll is being passed around. I'm starting with the new sheet because with the other sign-up sheet, we had some people had showed up like the first time and then dropped out, and other people that came in late. So this one should be more complete as our current class. Also being passed around with it is the list of presentations. If you're not on a team, you definitely need to sign up for a presentation. And I think there are a few extra, I know there's a few extra spots there. Also take a look on the left side. It's telling you what week. And so for example, group one, I would like you to present next week. I will be a little bit easier in your presentation, but if you don't have a major problems with team one doing that, I'd like to get going. This is next week will be week 6, so we're already more than a third. Well, as of today, we're a third of the way through the semester. So you will see on there that we'll have one a week until I don't know, for another 5 weeks or so, and then we have to start doubling up as it is anyway. There are some teams that have almost nobody on them. And so the people that are on a team that have very few members, you have a choice of moving to a team that has members, or doing it by yourself if you really want to. If you have signed up for a team, I think there's only one that has only one person on it at this moment. But there are some other teams where there are people available or are places available. So if you are on a very small team, you can take a look at moving someplace else. Okay. Well, today we're talking about, as you might have possibly guessed by the song, beginning with the end in mind, which is habit 2 of Dr. Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. A little bit of review. Our character is basically a composite of our habits because they are consistent, often unconscious patterns. They constantly, daily express our character. And so we kind of said it the other way before, that our actions lead to our habits. Our habits, then define our character over a period of time. Because what we do, they've said, it's been said that basically 30 days, if you were to do something every day for 30 days, you would have a habit created. You could do it, take longer and do it less than every day, but habits are created by repeated actions. And as it says here, at some point, you just no longer even think about it. You just do it. And so those are the things that control our lives to a large extent. So just reminding ourselves, that's why Dr. Covey says that what we need to build in order to change our lives are new habits that perhaps we don't have now, and break habits that we do have now. Here are next week's videos. Some of these we'll watch today. So it won't be, even at this, we just saw one. But even at this, there's 18, 26, 26, 32, 42, 62, 67, but we're going to be watching probably at least a couple of them today in class, I'm sure. So it'll be down to about an hour. In case of you do not understand, let me mention while I'm thinking about it, your entries to your journals 4, 5, and 6, you don't hand those in until you're done with 6. And so there's a deadline for 6, and that is part of the assignment that we talked about previously. That's not the one I want. But in our Moodle page, as of last week, we saw there was a new project added, and that's to cover all 3 weeks. So if you look at week 4, that is in the peer-to-peer workshop assignment. you will hold your entries. You should write them now while it's fresh in your mind, but you should hold them until you can write for week 6, and then those 3 are all entered into the workshop a project that we have. Oops, you're not seeing it, are you? Anyway, going over there a second. So again, here is our peer-to-peer workshop assignment. So all of your entries for 4, 5, and 6 are uploaded here simultaneously. So you did not see an upload site in week 4. You will not see an upload site in week 6. You actually won't see one in week 7 because this is where it's at here in week 4. So when you're ready with all of them, 4, 5, and 6, you upload them into this. And once you've uploaded, then you'll start receiving some of the entries by other students, and you will then have a chance to give them some feedback, score them and give them some feedback, so they can kind of get an idea. So each person should get feedback from 5 people, including you, each of you, and then so you'll get 5 from other people and so forth, and you will be responsible for evaluating 5 other people's. So everybody do 5 and receive 5. And hopefully Moodle will control all that. They are somewhat random. I suppose at some point, the last one to do any evaluations will get the last 5 available, I guess. And if somebody doesn't upload theirs on time, they will not. They are not able to participate if they don't upload something. So you need to upload something, even if it's bad, or you not only lose the points for that assignment, which are only 2 points, but you then don't have the opportunity to earn 10 points by evaluating 5 other people. And so there's 12 points altogether available in this project. 2 for doing your own and 10 for evaluating other people. So it's a pretty important part of your semester's work to do this. So anyway, are there any questions on that before we go back to today's presentation? Okay. Well, I'm sure there will be some questions. There may be some questions once you get started. Because I haven't gone through this myself. This is the first time I've tried using the workshop function of Moodle. I know other people have, but I have not. And so I've participated in something similar to that on a Coursera, in a Coursera course, and I found it quite effective. In that course, happened to be put on by a pair of professors at Arizona State University, and they have created the largest largest certification program for people who want to teach English as a foreign language. And they teach 100,000 people a year in their program. All their videos are pre-recorded and everything. And so almost all except for certain critical projects that they do at some point, the teachers don't actually evaluate creative projects at all. Students evaluate each other's creative projects until they get to like a final project, then the teachers do it. But that's how they're able to teach 100. 2 people can teach 100,000 people a year. But I found as a student in that, I found it very, very effective. Part of it was the quality of their videos, and part of it was that it did force me to think a lot about all the various creative projects they had us do. It may force me to think about my own, also receive feedback on my own, but also made me think about it because I was also evaluating other people. So it was one of the best courses I ever took, even though in reality, except for the final project, the teachers never had a direct contact with us. It was all online. Okay, so let me go back to our presentation. Okay. This is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of Alice in Wonderland, but anywhere where a little girl climbs into a rabbit hole and anyway disappears into this other strange society, among which she runs into a Cheshire cat, and she's lost in this new kingdom. And Alice says, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to walk from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to go, where you want to get to. I don't much care. Then it doesn't matter which way you walk. So long as I get somewhere, oh, you're sure to do that as long as you walk long enough." Well, that's kind of symbolic of a lot of people in life. If we walk long enough, we get somewhere. But do we actually get where we want to go? Are we lost like Alice in this wonderland and don't know where we're going and don't know how to get there, but we get somewhere? And that's, Dr. Covey suggests that's where most of us go in life. We just get somewhere. Again, going back to our paradigm of 7 habits. So we're on habit 2, begin with the end in mind. And let's, I guess we'll go ahead and watch this first one to kind of introduce the subject. Oops. And so I'm going to pause the. Okay, so that gives us a good overview of this habit of beginning with the end in mind. In his book, one of the put this I'll put it down here. One of the things that ideas he brought out was that think of yourself, picture in your mind that you're. I know funerals are different for different religions and so forth, so it's probably not. The way I'm going to describe it is not the same as it is with many of the funerals that you've experienced. But at least in the typical funeral in America, not all of them, but the typical one is that they actually have what's called a viewing, which is the funeral home fixes up the deceased, puts makeup on them, makes them look as natural as possible, and people have a chance, at least family members, if not, whoever wants to, basically, can come and take one last look at the person who is about to be buried or cremated or whatever they're going to do with the body. And so anyway, if you can imagine that, whether you've experienced it or not, you're waiting in a line to go up and view at this last opportunity to view the person in the casket. And people are talking and you gradually get closer and closer to the casket, and you finally arrive at the casket, and you look inside the casket, and it is you. And you may be a little bit stunned. You sit down to see what's going to happen now. And a number of people get up and are given the opportunity to speak about you, their favorite memories of you, and the things that they may have learned from you or witnessed that you accomplished in your life and so forth. What would you want them to say about you? What would you want them to say about your career, about your family, about your integrity, your what you did for the community, whatever it might be? What would you want them to say about you once you've gone on? He suggests that it might be a good exercise to write your own obituary. Again, what would you want somebody to write about you when you're dead? A lot of us go through the entire life without ever asking ourselves that question, without really thinking about what it is we want to be known for when it's over. Is it how much money we've made? Is it how many children we've had? How many, whatever? Just what is it that we think that we want to be valued for? And so he challenges us to think about that. what kind of character they might talk about. What were you like? What did you do for society, for your family, for your church, whatever it is you dedicate your time to? What were your achievements in business and so forth? All these things are some people are going to remember someday when you die. And what do you want them to say about you or write about you? Anyway, Oliver Wendell Holmes was one of the great chief justices of the Supreme Court of America. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us, which suggests, at least from his perspective, what he would want people to write about him is his character. Anyway, the idea of begin with the end in mind is to begin with the in your mind what you really want to be, what you really want to accomplish, with a real clear understanding of your destination. It is possibly busy, for example, very, very busy without actually being very effective. So being busy and being effective are not the same thing. In fact, he tells a story in his book about a work crew out in a jungle, we'll say here in Malaysia, and they're given the assignment to build a road through a jungle here. And so they get to work and they're chopping down trees and they're cutting away the underbrush and they're grading the ground to flatten it out so they can start putting down gravel and so forth. And after they've worked for a number of days, somebody climbs up one of these palm trees and looks out over the forest and yells down, "We're going in the wrong direction." And somebody down the bottom says, "Yeah, but we're making progress." Okay. So the question is, can you really be making progress and you're going the wrong direction? And yet a lot of people do make progress in their lives, at least that's what they feel like they're doing, even without even knowing where they're going. They have never decided where they're going. So they're making progress towards what? What is they're making progress towards? They don't know, but they're making progress. And that's ends up being their life, how they conduct their life. It just make progress. Just keep doing it. Just keep working. So anyway, that's again, if you don't know where you're going, as with Alice, well then you're going to get somewhere. If you just keep walking, keep going, you'll get somewhere, surely. But where will that be? Peter Drucker was one of the great business management. In fact, some people say he was the father of business management. He's the first one that started kind of making it into scientific principles and so forth. And so one of the things he said was efficiency is doing things right, and effectiveness is doing the right things. So in your working hard, you might even be extremely efficient at working hard. You get a lot done. Well, that's commendable. But you're still not getting where you're going if you're not also being effective. If you haven't figured out where you're going, then you're working hard. You can even be extremely efficient. You can be extremely talented. You can come up with a lot of adjectives for how, about your work. But again, if you don't know what you're doing, where you're headed, if you don't have a final goal, then you're not doing the right things. He also said the best way to predict the future is to create it. Dr. Covey quoted that in the video, but actually I believe it, I'm presuming it's, from my understanding, it's Peter Drucker who actually originated that saying. The best way to predict the future is to create it. You probably heard it quoted by lots and lots of people, but I think he was the originator of the idea. Dr. Covey just said on the video that all things are created twice. There's a saying, it relates to sewing for women, measure twice, cut once. If you're making a dress or something, make sure you cut it right before you start sewing it together. But it can also be said of lots of other things in the manly world. If you're trying to string up a cable or something, again, if you don't do something properly, then it's going to take a lot of repair. That guy on the video, the restaurant owner, is an example of somebody who, despite their best efforts, a very good company, smart people, but not really thinking it through very well. The city said, oh, you need to do this and this and this, and they took their word for it. They never really thought it through what was going to happen if they did it exactly the way the city told them to do it, and they ended up building, a $600,000 restaurant that nobody could get in and out of very easily. And so they had very few customers, and they had to spend another $50,000, $60,000 trying to correct the error that, if they had figured this out ahead of time, would not have cost them. They needed a different exit, a different way, or something. I talked about the jungle. This principle is applicable in our private lives, but also in our business lives, as Dr. Covey was saying. He said, basically apply it in all of your lives. Think about it in every setting, all your roles. What is your purpose? What is that ultimate goal that you're working towards, so that you can get there? And that goal is different if you're in business than if you're talking about your family. Although he mentioned the importance of principles of deciding, what is your core, what's the very core of your existence? What are you going to base, your decisions on? And he says it should be principles as the one constant. In other places he talks about, let's say you make your spouse the center of your life. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if your spouse dies? What happens if your spouse decides to divorce you? What if it, whatever it might be, it doesn't only depend on you. So once you make your spouse the center of your life can be destroyed by something that you don't control. Not true with principles, but all those other centers that he was talking about, the other possible centers you can put in the middle of your life, they can be disrupted in some way because you don't control them. They're not constants. Whereas principles, he says, are constant, and those don't change, even if something bad happens in your marriage, something bad happens in your family, but something bad happens in your work. The principles don't change, even if your circumstances change dramatically. Anyway, in the business world, he was teaching a group of business people, and in listening to the things he was talking about, one of the business executives realized that he had not been he had not really provided the leadership in his organization, that he had been the manager. He managed all these people, and he thought it was a good thing that he was a hands-on manager. And so every day he was right down, working with his employees and stuff, but he took very little time to decide the end in mind or other important decisions, stepping stone decisions to get to that end in mind. And so the company was rather rudderless in a sense, because he did not accept that responsibility of really deciding what they were going to do, setting the vision. So after attending some of the workshops, he went back to Seattle. He happened to live in Seattle. And it was an oil company of some sort. I'm not sure, a distributorship. I'm not sure exactly the nature of his company, but it had something to do with oil, Dr. Covey mentioned. And he decided to divest himself of the management responsibilities, which by itself was somewhat difficult to do because everybody had become used to him kind of micromanaging everything. And so when as he divested himself of being the manager and putting responsibilities on the shoulders of the managers, to some degree there was some resistance. They expected him. In fact, Dr. Covey said he himself, when he was working for a major corporation, had to go through that. He went through that same process as his boss, the person ahead of him, changed. Dr. Covey was in charge of a certain geographic area of the world in a major company. And his boss was changed, and the new boss basically told Dr. Covey, okay, you're in charge of this area. I'm here to support you, but you are the decision maker here. And Dr. Covey didn't quite believe him. And so when some major decision came up, Dr. Covey called his boss and expected his boss to make the decision. And his boss listened to the problem and said, well, when I was in your position, I had something similar, and I did this and this. And another situation I remember was kind of like that, this other thing. But Stephen, you're in charge, and you have to make the decision. I can't make it for you. You're the one. You're the person on the front line, so to speak. You're the one in the best position to make the decision, and I'm not going to make it for you. You have to make the decision. And he said it took a while before he understood, first off, that he really was in charge, and it took him a while to grasp how important that was. Suddenly, he was the one staying up at nights, pondering how to how to grow the business in that area. He was the one at night, putting all the extra effort and stuff because his boss was no longer. He had divested himself of management, and so now suddenly, Dr. Covey, in his position with his corporation, he had to be the leader, the true leader, and the manager of his area. And his boss was not going to tell him what to do. So basically, the Seattle executive did that same thing. He had to go through that same process. People didn't quite believe him when he said, you're in charge of your area now. Come talk to me if you need some help, some suggestions or whatever. But you're in charge. But he went through that process. Anyway, after 6 months, he came back to another workshop with Dr. Covey, and during that time they had increased their sales by something like 5,000%. I can't remember exactly the number, but it's a huge number. And because he had become the leader and not the manager, and that gave focus to the whole company. I had exactly the opposite. I had the experience of not doing that. One of my last newspapers I started, I actually had 3 newspapers, but one of them I really was kind of near and dear to my heart, and that one I did what the Seattle executive first did originally. I was the hands-on manager, and I almost there was a gal, my vice president. I was the president, she was the vice president. And she was a poor selection, frankly, but she had a lot of enthusiasm, but she was deceptive, and she ended up giving us bad information and so forth. But in a way, I defaulted leadership to her, and that was basically that newspaper had to be closed down. And the other 2 were fine, but that one had to be closed down ultimately because I was not the leader of that one. I did not take a leadership position. I wanted to show people I was a hard worker and all this sort of stuff, and I defaulted in some of the leadership responsibilities I really needed. So I understand from the other side what a bad decision it is. My dad was I came by that honestly. My dad, I think I've mentioned, was a farmer. When he was somewhat younger than I am, I'm trying to remember. In fact, he would have only been like 55 or something, so a lot younger than I am. he started getting rheumatoid arthritis in his joints, which made it really hard for him to work out in the farm. He really wanted to stay on the farm. He loved the farm, but he would hire people, and they'd be down digging ditches really slowly, and he'd say, "Here, get out of here," and he'd jump in the hole and start digging ditches and show them how a real man dug ditches or whatever. And he just could not stop himself from doing it. He could not stop himself from being the guy in the front lines. And ultimately, the doctor said, "You got to get out of that farm. You can't. You're destroying your health. You have to get off the farm." So he was able to lease it, and he was able to move off the farm, and he did fine, and the value of the farm went up, and he was able to retire fine. But he didn't want to retire. He wanted to be a farmer, but he can't be a farmer. He couldn't be a farmer. He couldn't be the leader. He just couldn't do it. He had to be working with the help, the hired help, and that's not how. It doesn't work out right. Dr. Covey on the video talked about jigsaw puzzle. It means a puzzle that you put together piece by piece, and basically says if this were the jigsaw puzzle that you're putting together, where would you even start with that jumbled mess? All the pieces are sitting there without knowing what the end is. You have no idea. Basically, you can maybe find straight edges to try to build the frame around the outside, but other than that, you're just really, if it has very many pieces, you're in trouble. I actually tried to do that with my granddaughter during vacation, during the break between semesters, and I got the frame all around, and I struggled. I had no idea what I was doing, and my granddaughter is like 7 years old. She came, and I don't know, somehow she had that end in mind already figured out. And in less than 5 minutes, she had it done. And I was struggling. I don't know I had no idea what I was putting together. Anyway, so if this were the puzzle, in its pieces, then now you could start figuring out, what to put together. But if you don't know what the end in mind is, that doesn't do you much good. It'll take you a long time trying to put that together. So you need to do that. You need the end in mind. To put the pieces together. Dr. Covey said in the video, it's a principle that all things are created twice, but not all first creations are by conscious design. And so that's the point, is that are you going to design it first? Or are you going to let somebody else make the first creation? In a way, that was my failure with that newspaper I had to close down. Is I had a design in mind, but I allowed my vice president to talk me out of it, giving me false information, by the way, for which I should have fired her immediately, but I did not. But she ended up changing my end in mind with false information, which led to the closing of the newspaper. So I gave away, and again, I don't know how you protect yourself from somebody lying to you. It's in a position of trust, but maybe you just make sure. But anyway, she screwed up everything royally. It would have actually worked out if I had proceeded with the end in mind that I had. But once I switched, it didn't work out. So leadership and management, you consider those the two creations, as you mentioned. So habit 2 is based on principles of personal leadership, which means that leadership is the first creation. That's where you decide what is the end in mind. And then habit 3 is putting first things first. And that's a management principle, is that once you know what the end in mind is, now you can begin managing your day-to-day life, managing your time, managing your priorities, and building what you envisioned. You can rescript and become your first creator. So just because somebody else has begun the script for you, they have told you what your first creation is, doesn't mean you have to keep it there. I remember, I hope I didn't tell you this story already, but maybe I did. Sorry if I did. But I remember I was teaching a journalism class back in Kazakhstan, and I had this one student. I don't think I knew what her major was. I presumed she was in journalism, but I hadn't seen her before. And anyway, she started this journalism class, and then she just disappeared. For 10 weeks, she was gone. And so right at the end of the semester, she shows up, and I could tell she wasn't real happy, and that she's kind of seemed a little moody and stuff, even when she was there. And she came back, and she was still in this very down mood. And she said, "Is there any way I can pass this class? I've got to graduate." And I said, "Well, why haven't you been coming?" And kind of talked around, and finally in our discussion, she said, "I'm an economics major. My parents said I had to major in economics, and I hate it. I hate economics, but I'm about ready to graduate, and I just want to get it done. So if there's any way I can pass the class, I don't care what the grade is. Anyway, this isn't a requirement for me, but I took the class. I do like to write, but I don't have a good excuse for not coming. But is there any way I can pass it?" And so I said, "Well, I don't see how in the world you can." But we had, I don't know what I think it's 4 major assignments. You haven't even come to class to figure out how to do those assignments. And without really learning the principles that I taught during the semester of how to write, how to do journalism writing, you probably would fail. But if you want to try, I'll give you here's a book you can read. This is my textbook. I can maybe spend 30 minutes with you to kind of explain the real keys to it. But then you're on your own. I can't do it for you. And you're going to have to do a fantastic job for me to consider waiving the fact that you didn't attend 2/3 of the class. You're going to have to do a great job with these assignments. And so anyway, I thought, well, this is a person who doesn't show up for 10 weeks. She's going to fail this too, right? Anyway, she starts coming back. The best writing I've ever seen. She had never taken any journalism classes, and hers were the best journalistic articles any of my students in Kazakhstan ever wrote. What? And the content was such that I knew she hadn't plagiarized it, because it was, really good sources and the people I knew and I could talk to and everything. What the heck? And so I just sat down and talked to her. So she told me some more about her feelings about economics stuff. And I said, "Look, I wish that I could talk to your parents, because this is why I tell students, don't do what your parents want you to do. Because a person who's doing something only for their parents can't maintain that for a whole lifetime. They will not maintain that for a whole lifetime. If they're an economics major and they hate economics, they're not going to do well in their career. They can't. They won't keep up with current news. They won't keep up with current research. They can't do it because they hate it. And so even if they get through with straight A's in college, they will not maintain that because they hate it." I said, "You're too close to graduating. You should just go ahead and graduate. But I can tell you're a good enough writer, and I will recommend you become a writer for a magazine or something if you want to write as a career. Finish your, maybe we can find you something in the business field where you can get started in business writing." So that's exactly what happened. She finished her degree. I wrote her a good letter of recommendation. She got a good job writing for Business Insider for Central Asia, and took off in her career of writing instead of what her parents wanted her to do. Anyway, it's important that you script your own life. As I told her, there's no way you can be successful in life doing something you hate. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can be even financially successful, especially like say your dad or your mom already has a business going and all you have to do is assume their business. Well, I guess you could make money from that. But, do anything uniquely your own, you're not going to do it if you don't like what you're doing. But there are sometimes there's a couple of principles in research that that suggest really how you can screw up your life. One is the spiral of silence, where you just, when something bad is happening, you're just afraid to say anything because you're going to get yelled at or whatever, and so you don't say anything. That's what they say happened to the Jews during World War II, is that they just didn't. They were afraid to say anything when the Nazis started coming, and by the time anybody could have resisted, they were all in concentration camps and being killed. And even the good people, the non-Jews, also some of them, of course, did not. They did not support that, but they didn't say anything either. So probably the majority of people in Germany did not support what happened, but they were so intimidated by the Nazis that they said nothing, and one of the worst periods of human history took place in World War II. Same thing with groupthink, because sometimes you surround yourself only by people who think like you, and you end up thinking like the group because you're not thinking on your own. Anyway, those things happen. But anyway, the two additional unique human endowments that enable us to expand our proactivity and to exercise personal leadership in our lives is imagination and conscience. What should I do, and what can I imagine myself doing? We have to imagine what we want to do. We have to create it in our mind and then pursue it. There is a good examples of people who have, I think I mentioned last week, people who have been thrown in prison and made re-scripted their lives. Anwar Sadat was the president of Egypt, and he was one of those who he actually helped overthrow the king of Egypt, and was a very strong Muslim. But after seeing all the devastation, everything caused by trying to destroy Israel, he decided that wasn't in the best interest of his people. And so under Jimmy Carter, the guy in the center, the president of the United States at that time, they got together and worked out a peace treaty that is still being honored. And they're, both countries are benefiting from that. He ultimately, Sadat ultimately was murdered by somebody from his own religion, but somebody who didn't agree with him doing that. But he re-scripted his life and made the decisions he wanted to do. And by the way, that never, never, never the top was what he originally said. There would never, never, never be peace with Israel. But as he re-scripted his life, he decided that just didn't make sense anymore. It just was destructive. We're not going to take time, I think, to watch this one today. You'll be watching your own, but I'll give you some idea of what it's about, and if we have time, we'll come back to it. But as I mentioned, the idea of leadership is also important for your own, for your business and your professional life. One of the things he suggests is that we should build a mission statement. We should write down what our life is all about in our different roles. And every organization we're in part of should have a mission statement. So that's kind of what he was talking about when in his consulting work, that he's worked with Fortune 100 companies, so the top 100 companies in the world, and the executives were very surprised to find out that their employees had no idea what they were all about, what they personally were supposed to be doing, what the company was, what its real role or what its real goal was. They ultimately created a personal mission statement, or a company mission statement, or organization mission statement, philosophy, or creed, something to base why do we exist, what is our point of existing, what is it ultimately that we want to achieve. Anyway, focus on what you want to be in character, if it's a personal one, to do, your contributions, your achievements, the things we were talking about at the funeral, and in the values and principles upon which you want to base your future. He also talks about what's in the center of your life. He already mentioned that in the other video. This might be the same video that we were looking at. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about what is the center. He already talked about a little bit, but whatever is at the center of your life will be the source of your security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Because that whatever in the center, you start deciding in the sense of wisdom, in the sense of what should I do. That's kind of your wisdom and your guidance. Your security is how do I secure my future, my happiness, so to speak, based on this particular center. Is it becoming rich? Is it spending time with my family? What is it that, what is it that I consider security, considering what I consider the center of my life? And how do I empower myself in achieving my goals with this as my center? So he talks about different alternative centers. He did in the video also, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But if you're spouse-centered, as I mentioned, that could go awry. If you're family-centered, even as noble as that sounds, and this is coming from somebody who has 10 kids and, was married for, 60 years before he died or whatever. But he loves his family, very successful kids, wonderful wife. So it's not like he's saying don't care about your family. That's not what he's saying at all. He's just saying in general that can't be your center, and for you to feel secure because you don't know what's going to happen in your family. Money-centeredness, that also is something that be elusive. There have been billionaires who have gone broke before because it's based on investments and so forth. The economy, if we have a great recession or depression, lots of billionaires could become paupers very quickly. Work-centered, I may fall into this somewhat myself, being too work-centered. I try to, I don't know, I am a workaholic, that's what I call myself, and so that suggests by itself that I'm too work-centered. But whatever it is, pleasure-centered, enemy-centered, possession-centered, even church-centered, he said. He's a religious man, but even if you're church-centered and you think that's a good thing, it's not the same as principles. So your church may help you decide what are your principles that you think are eternal and what's most important. But I myself changed churches. I was raised in one church and became dissatisfied with that. And if my whole life was church-centered, I would have had a very disrupted life. But it isn't. And I think in that case, I think I am principle-centered ultimately. But anyway, self-centered. Ultimately, he says principles have to be. That's the most constant, steady way of measuring your life and building your life. Being successful in your life is to depend on the principles. And the same principles, by the way, he believes are the same principles that make you successful in the family as make you successful in a business. Are the same principles that make you successful at church, make you successful in a community organization. That those same principles are exactly the same principles that make you successful whatever you're doing. So maybe in that sense, I'm not necessarily work-oriented. I have a strong work ethic. So that may be different. I have to think about that. Anyway, going back to Dr. Frankl, first off, he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And so that's one of the important things to recognize, and that he had to recognize when he was in concentration camp, is that he couldn't change. In fact, Dr. Covey, I think the video that I had you watch last week, Dr. Covey was talking about this and how Dr. Frankl wasn't killed like a lot of his friends and family members because they decided to experiment on him. So they were doing medical experiments on him and stuff. And he he was during a session like that, he was stripped naked and they were doing stuff to him, and he started escaping his mind, and he started realizing there's a difference between this is Dr. Covey's, I don't know, maybe it's Dr. Frankl's definition, but there's a difference between being free and having liberty. That in the concentration camp, he could not have liberty, but ultimately he maintained his freedom by maintaining control of his mind and what he envisioned, what he was thinking for the future, made his plans for the future, all that, the things he was growing as a person. So in a very real sense, just as again as Anwar Sadat, and we talked before about Alexander Solzhenitsyn and so forth, that these great men, even under dire circumstances, kept growing and thinking and planning, envisioning until they got out of captivity, and then they achieved greatness. Dr. Frankl also said, we don't invent our missions in life, we detect them. So in a sense, when you start deciding what your real inner self is, what you really love the most, what you really care about, then you can start building your mission from there. Again, if you're in the wrong major, you need to decide how, if you are able to rescript your life, that's up to you. But basically, if we're just going by somebody else's script, then we're probably, we're probably going down the wrong path. We're not going where we really are destined to go, you might say, where our greatness can be achieved. And that's how we have to detect is what is our purpose, what can we really achieve, how can we best contribute to the world. And that's what would you do in life even if you were not paid to do it? So that's one of the questions that's asked in discovering where you really want to go. If it's important enough to you that you would do it even without being paid, then you ought to think real hard about making that sort of a dream now, how, deciding how you can achieve that now in a professional way, if it's possible. Now, a lot of people have achieved great things without being their profession. So that's not impossible to do. But it is certainly, Dr. Covey wrote another book after the 7 Habits. He wrote the 8th Habit. And one of the keys to the 8th Habit was passion. So it's basically built around this concept. The whole book was that ultimately, if you're really passionate about something, you're going to be so much better at it, and so much more. You're going to have so much more power, so much more energy, so much more enthusiasm, so much more excitement, so much more imagination if you're focusing your life on what you feel passionate about. And so that became his 8th book, or his eighth habit in another book, I put it that way. So we can live out of our imagination, out of our history. We can rescript if we choose to do so, and it should, in discovering our dream, it should be something we're passionate about, he suggests. This is going to be another one of the videos you're going to be watching. We won't watch that today. But he talks about achieving clarity of purpose and how important it is also to know what you really want and to be specific about it. He talks in one of the videos you may have already listened to about being confronted by a beggar who wanted, I can't remember, 50 cents or something, probably to go try to get some more liquor or something. But he wanted a very small amount. And anyway, Tony Robbins thought, what a difference that is. He's asking so little out of life. He says he's going to be happy with 50 cents or whatever, and yet, he'll be looking for another 50 cents tomorrow, whatever. That's not clarity of purpose when from day to day, you're asking for 50 cents, basically. So you need to really clarify what it is you really want in life. Um, Also, another concept that Tony Robbins talks about is this what he calls a cycle of success. And the cycle of success is to think about what your purpose is, what your goal is, and start envisioning it. He's a big believer in visualization, and you'll be watching a video on that this week. But he has some examples of how you can actually change, even in a short demonstration, how you can change what you can accomplish just by visualizing it. But one of the stories he tells about is a research that was done with basketball. I may have told you all this already, but anyway, they had basketball players. They divided them into three groups, and at the start, they're all basically about the same, had about the same talent and their ability to make free throws. And that's what you get to do when you get fouled or something. You stand at a line. With everybody just standing around, nobody's trying to guard you. You try to make a basket. Um, and yet some people have a really hard time. It's a really simple thing to do, but no matter how much they practice, they seem to have a hard time making that free throw. And so they decided to divide this group into three and have experiment with them. So one group, they basically did nothing. So that was their control group. Just went about their normal activities. One of the groups every day came in for I don't know how long it was, an hour or something, and practiced every day making their free throws. And the other group, for that same length of time, just envisioned doing it. But in their mind, in their imagination, every time they tried their free throw, they were successful. And so day after day, they watched themselves in their mind making free throw after free throw after free throw, and they were perfect in their free throw shooting in their mind. Anyway, when they got all done with this, I don't know how many weeks they went through this, but after a period of time, they had them all come back and shoot free throws again. And the one that the students or the players that did the best were those who only imagined it. Those who just kept practicing without imagination, whatever hangups they had, they still had the same hangups. And so they were still, you can kind of make yourself a failure. If you believe you can't do something, then you can't do it. And so it was the ones that after weeks of envisioning in their mind that they were successful all the time had overcome those sorts of psychological barriers, and they were the most successful. The ones that were practicing with a real ball didn't change much. So it's again, visualizing can be very important. So he said basically your visualizing helps you to understand your potential. You can start in your mind, you start seeing your potential, what you can really accomplish. And then with that, when you really believe in your potential, then you take more action because it's just, if you believe it, like if you want to sell products of some sort, if you believe you're going to be successful, you're going to work a little harder. And so you work a little harder and you get better results, and your results get you enthusiastic because you're suddenly doing better. And so now you can envision yourself doing better, and you really believe your potential is even greater. And so you start working even a little harder, and then you have better results. And then so you can get this going like a funnel and achieve greater success. But he says you start with a visualization. If you start there, then that's your best place to start in this cycle, and to build the cycle until it goes faster, faster, deeper and deeper. And he refers to RPM for those that know about engines. This is a way of measuring the rotations of in an engine. But his is R for results, P for purpose, M for massive action plan. They kind of divorce that M, I think. But anyway, so he talks about massive action plan. So if you kind of all three of those together, then help you create success. But they may start back here with your belief, with your visualization, belief, action, and results. I talked the other day about, I think, about stepping stone goals, and that's just, again, an illustration of it. Again, a way of getting across the river without getting your feet wet, but it's also symbolic of how to achieve your end goals. Is that you can't jump across that creek all at one jump. You're going to end up probably falling on your face and breaking your nose, or like I did. That's why I'm hobbling around as I try to jump around a little pub the other day. We had a big rainstorm. I landed and slid and hit hard and twisted my knee. And I hope I don't have to have surgery for it. Anyway, you jump too far, you actually are endangering yourself. And so the idea is to what we taught the migrant students back in Washington State was think of your stepping stones. Yes, right now you're working in the fields with your parents, but what could you do? This is your end goal. You want to go to the university to become an architect. I have a friend who is a migrant student who is now an architect in Seattle, and so he had to, by going when he was in high school, he went to this student leadership conference that I helped with, and he was taught this principle. So he figured out his stepping stone goals, and he is now a successful professional architect. But he would not have been that without the student leadership program that helped him believe, first off, helped him to envision that it was even possible for him to leave the fields and achieve what he really wanted to do, which would be an architect, and then to understand how to set up these stepping stone goals. So he had this goal of being an architect. He created the stepping stone goals. How do I get there? And then he started putting in the hard work. And it took him maybe longer, definitely longer than if he had grown up, with rich parents or whatever, in America, and didn't have a language problem from sneaking in across the border and only speaking Spanish and that sort of stuff. I mean, it took him longer than it would have taken somebody else, but he achieved his goal, and he's now a professional architect in Seattle. Dr. Covey talks about using our whole brain, and this is part of visualization, but it's also understanding that you do have two halves of your brain. Talk about the left hemisphere is more logical, verbal, deals with words, deals with parts and specifics, deals with analysis and so forth. Your right brain is more intuitive, creative, deals with pictures, with wholes and relationships, deals with synthesis, deals with simultaneous and holistic, and so forth. And it's something that takes over a lot of times in our sleep. Your right brain has a field day when there's nobody telling it what to do, and distracting it with other things. There was the president for several years of one of the top business associations in America wrote a book that I read many years ago. He said he used this in his work, and what he would do is he would program his mind. He would study things out during the day. He'd be working on he was a consultant, a business consultant, and so he'd be working on the problems for his client. And then at night, before he went to bed, he would sit down and review the problems confronting his client, possible solutions, and then he'd program his brain. He'd tell his brain, okay, solve this problem. How can we best solve this problem? Solve this problem. And order his brain, tell his brain a number of times to solve the problem. And we'd wake up, he very frequently would have lots of these good ideas for how to solve the problem for his clients. He really believed in that. I've done that a little bit myself. I definitely, in the morning, I have lots of creative ideas that if I don't take time to write them down, I really have lost something important and valuable. Your mind does a lot of great creative work at night. And I personally, there are times when I've taken advantage of it, and times when I've lost it because I didn't take the time to write down the ideas I had. Your mind is very creative, and nighttime is one of the most creative periods. So, the president of the American Business Association did that on purpose to program his mind. You can even try this. I program my mind you can program it as an alarm clock. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but that's one of the easy ways to test your programming. And so I started doing that when I was young, and just told instead of using an alarm clock or maybe having an alarm clock as a backup, I just tell my brain, okay, wake me up at 7, wake me up at 7, wake me up at 7, tell myself several times. And it really does work. Your brain has a clock inside of it. It basically can figure that out. And I now don't even hardly have to think about it. I knew I wanted to get up at 7 this morning. Every morning, my brain tells, let my brain know when I want to get up, and it's automatic. So I woke up this morning, ready, jumped out of bed at 10 till 7, go looked at my clock, and after I was out of bed, 10 to 7. Other days when I don't have to, sometimes I kind of turn off the alarm clock, say, okay, I've got a day off, turn it off. And I might sleep quite a bit longer. But you really can program your brain. And one of the things that Dr. Covey talks about is exactly what Tony Robbins was saying, is visualize it. Visualize it every way you can. Visualize it in deep detail. Hear it, smell it, see it, taste it, whatever senses in your imagination you can put into play in envisioning what you consider success. Do it, envision it. Also expand your mind with new ideas, do reading and stuff. Take time to really to develop your mental capabilities. And one of the things you do in visualization is you're creating an internal comfort zone. Like hitting the free throws, you're now comfortable with doing it. You can see yourself doing it. So now the reality becomes even more than if you'd practiced, because in your mind, you're now comfortable. I used to play basketball on a regular basis. Not a great basketball player, but I think it's significant that the one day that I was really in the zone, I was the best player in the court, was the day that I had a bad cold. I wasn't even sure I should play, and I had taken a bunch of cold medicine. And so basically all my self-doubts and stuff were gone because I had so much cold medicine. And that day, anything I threw up went in. I don't know. It was amazing to me. I was the best player, and I'm never the best player unless I'm playing little kids or something. But that day, competing against some really good players, I was the best player because I couldn't psych myself out. I just had too much cold medicine. So I do believe this very frequently. We undermine ourselves, and so doing just the opposite, so you don't have to take cold medicine to do it. If you can just envision yourself, be comfortable with it, believe in yourself, it's you remove a lot of those mental obstacles that sometimes we set up for ourselves. Okay, one last thing just to cover real quick, and you should go through this. It might show up on a quiz, who knows? But anyway, even right now, take a look at it. About 15% of the people in this survey of businesses and employees, only 15% of employees could identify their company's top goals and priorities. So only 15% knew their company's priorities. Only 19% of employees felt passionate about their company's goals. Only 19% felt passionate. 49% of the employees felt like the employees felt like only 49% of their work time was actually spent fulfilling their company's most important goals. So they felt, in other words, 51% they were lost, basically. And the employees said that only about 51% or 51% of employees understood their role in achieving their company's top goals. So they, first off, like I said, they couldn't identify their company's top goals. If they could identify, they weren't passionate about it. And once they identified, 49% said that they felt like only 49% of their time was actually being spent towards their company's top goals, and only 51% of them even understood their role in the company in achieving those goals. So again, what Dr. Covey was saying is that that's where he would start in some of his business consulting, was how do you get your employees more involved in your goals? and so that they feel a passion about it, so they feel part of it, so they feel like their opinions mattered, that they felt like they could actually change the course of the company for the better if they made suggestions, things like that, maybe involved in their development of their mission statement, but whatever, get the employees involved, and your company can suddenly become much more effective, because they know what their goals and priorities are. They know what their role is. They know, they feel passionate about it, and they feel like their time is being well spent in accomplishing it. So important to apply these same principles in our business and in helping our employees to be part of that in that sort of a corporate setting. So I kind of already mentioned that, and this is another one. So that's the end of the PowerPoint, and we are actually about time to start the quiz. The quiz this time has, I don't know, 13 questions, a little more. I'm giving you 15 minutes, and let me go. I don't think it has quite started yet. You get 15 minutes, but I gave a little envelope around it, so to speak. So if you don't start exactly at the same time, it doesn't matter. You get the 15 minutes regardless. So going to Moodle. Well, basically, you can start right now, actually, and or any time in the next couple of minutes. You have 15 minutes to do this. There are, as I said, I can't remember, 13 or 14 questions. So you still have at least a minute per question.